Prime Minister Narendra Modi is holding bilateral talks with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the sidelines of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. This is the first in-person meeting between the two leaders. Johnson has cancelled his visit to India twice earlier this year because of the COVID pandemic. The bilateral meeting will be followed by a leader-level COP26 event titled Action and Solidarity, the Critical Decade, for which the UK has extended a special invitation for Modi to deliver an address on the subject of adaptation.
Arms around UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, this was Prime Minister Modi at the inauguration of the 26th UN Climate Change Summit in Glasgow. Earlier today, the Prime Minister landed to the chants of Har Har Modi. He was welcomed in Scotland with Desi patriotic songs sung by an enthusiastic diaspora. The highlight of Prime Minister's Glasgow visit will be his address at COP26, where he will present India's climate action agenda. Heads of state from 120 countries will listen to Prime Minister Modi's mantra to fight climate change. The Prime Minister's speech comes at a time when India itself is battling flash floods and forest fires. The climate calamities are too big to ignore. But initiatives in the field of solar energy are something that the Prime Minister is expected to highlight.
India has a good report card to share, and they're leading the space of solar energy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi should be talking about one sun, one world, one grid policy that interconnects all the countries.
The COP26 is an annual climate change conference. The summit aims to combat interference with climate system. This year's theme is Action and Solidarity, the Critical Decade.
Messages are very clear. Act now, make plans properly, be accountable, and we want things to happen for the world. But they also now realize that climate change is impacting some people more than them.
As we look at the green industrial revolution that's now needed around the world, we in the developed world must recognise the special responsibility we have to help everybody else to do it.
Global warming, greenhouse gases and emissions. Enemies that can only be fought with a united world. And on stage at Glasgow, for the first time since the pandemic began, Modi and friends enter mission mode. With Lavina Tandon in Glasgow, Bureau Report, India Today.
Joining me on the Newstrack live from Glasgow is Lavina Tandon. With me in the studio is our Foreign Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan. Geeta has been speaking to senior officials in the Indian government who've been briefing us about what Prime Minister Modi is likely to talk about, given the conflicting priorities of different nations. What's your best sense at this moment of the key touch points for Prime Minister Modi in this big global address when he speaks in a short while from now?
Well, Rahul, India has been one of the achievers, rare one at that, in terms of achieving the NDCs, the goals that were required and commitments made. And India is going to push not for the 2050 that the West wants, but the 2030, get the emissions down right away, because it's urgent. So that's what India is going to push for, and technological sharing of technology, technological inputs between countries and among nations. But we are coming right after G20 to Glasgow, Rahul. G20 was not at all optimistic. They only spoke of commitments, did not really commit. So we'll have to wait and see whether if COP26 they are actually going to commit or not. I'm not very hopeful on greater commitments.
That's critical, because through October, the monsoons hadn't left us. From Uttarakhand to Bihar, we're seeing the impact of climate change. You've been speaking, Lavina, to many of the activists, delegates and participants at the COP26. What are you picking up? Is there a sense of hope that the world leaders will realize the gravity of the challenge that confronts us? Or is this once again likely to remain a talking shop where they say the right things but don't go back and do very much?
There is hope, but it is also mixed with a lot of doubt, because we are in a chicken and egg situation here, Rahul. We have on the one hand, let's say, take the example of India. Now, India has done well with its report card. It is pushing for solar energy, but it has a lot of infrastructure to look after, and it has a zero carbon emission that it has to sign up to. On the other hand, India is saying the developed nations have to first come up with the fund, the climate fund that they had promised, in addition to the adaptation policy that is required for nations that are already suffering with the climate change disasters, India being one of them as well. So who comes first? Who will show the initiative? Now, today, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said that he commits to an extra 1 billion, making it 12.9 billion of commitment, but that is subjected to economic recovery. Now, that is really a very subjective thing. It may or may not happen. So this is while he talks of action from aspiration to action, yet this action that is being spoken about is yet to be properly and concretely seen. Now, this is where the doubt comes from. Of course, there is hope. Of course, there is a lot of people walking from all over the world urging that there has to be now concrete action, because we are at the brink of destruction, and that can only be arrested now and through all the 200 and 195 plus countries coming and signing up to 1.5 or at least 2 degree arresting of global warming. So it's very, very important, but there is a mixed reaction here, hope mixed with a lot of doubt, and especially China is missing. You see, China is missing in action, and they are a very, very important part of this entire process.
So we'll come back to you, Lavina, after the Prime Minister has spoken, for that update. Thank you very much. I couldn't think of a better person than Bill Gates to talk to about the challenges that the humans face, because he's the one who predicted that the next big threat would be from a pandemic. Now he's saying it's an upcoming global climate change disaster, which has initiated a conversation. But how seriously are his words being taken? We show you now an excerpt from an exclusive interview with one of the world's leading climate change warriors, Bill Gates.
With everything that we have seen in the last 2 years, do you see your ability to foresee things as a gift or a challenge?
Well, it's certainly a gift. I feel very lucky I get to work on innovative new things. Also, when you're as successful as I am, you have a responsibility to use that to save lives as much as possible, and to drive innovation to help solve the big problems, whether it's making us ready for the next pandemic or avoiding climate change.
Bill Gates, pleasure, honor to have you here at the India Today Conclave. We are going to focus on climate change because, as we said, this is the issue of our times. This is something that you've been deeply involved. We are calling you a climate change warrior in that sense. But I want to ask you, Bill, what made you engage with the issue of climate change in the first instance? Was there a trigger moment, a news headline, some personal experience that drove you in this direction?
Well, I like reading about science and, understanding weather and all sorts of things, but it really was my work in Africa for the Gates Foundation, where we work on nutrition and health, for the entire world. But what we were seeing was that the climate was already making farming near the equator far more difficult. And I decided I better learn about that because, if you're going to uplift every country in the world, understanding is climate going to hold that back and force us to do the whole economy in a different way. I felt I needed to know that. And so, I spent about 10 years starting in the year 2000 learning about that, and actually gave a TED Talk in 2010 where I warned that that is a huge problem that we're not doing the right things for.
But from that period, when you first got engaged with the issue of climate change, has the thinking evolved, changed in terms of the scale, the immediacy, the urgency in a way of climate change? Has your thinking in a way deepened as you read more about it, or as you witness around you, as we all are, these extreme climate events?
Yes, so the awareness that we've got a huge problem that'll get worse over time is much higher today than at any time in the past. A big milestone was in 2015, the Paris climate talks, where I and Prime Minister Modi, President Obama, and 30 others, we put the idea of innovation on the agenda. It was called Mission Innovation, and the idea was to get the R&D budgets of all these countries to go up, and I committed to do what's called breakthrough energy, where we would take the ideas and make sure that great companies were funded to turn those ideas into products to avoid climate change. So we have so much more to do. This is such a hard problem, but we're better off. The awareness, the government thinking about this, we've come a long way since 2015.
You know, if you had to convince the naysayers, because there will be always naysayers about the climate emergency, are there 3 top facts or anecdotes that stand out for you that you would choose to communicate simply and effectively to tell people, look, you know, we can't wait for tomorrow. This is a crisis of today.
Yeah, with climate, there is no quick solution like inventing a vaccine. You know, the pandemic, of course, has been an incredible tragedy, but we will see the end of it because of the vaccines. Climate change, you have to start the work to stop the emissions now to avoid disaster later, because the scale is so big and the number of areas of activities that create these emissions are so broad that there is no, you know, in a year, 2 years, come up with a solution. So the pandemic is much harder, but it's good. People, I mean, I hate to say it, but the climate negative effects now are alerting people to this, and particularly for countries near the equator, that includes India, the effects over the course of the century will be very dramatic. You know, the ability to work outside in the summer, the crop productivity, the weather systems, it will be dramatically different if we don't act in a huge way.
You know, what really impresses me about what you're trying to do, or should stagger us, is just the scale of what is required to be done. You've been speaking about the need for zero emissions at a time when you know, we need to decarbonize, according to you, 70% of the world economy. That sounds daunting in a way. How do you sort of impact on scale? Which area do you zero down on, and why, so that you can impact on a scale of the kind that you're talking about?
Yeah, zero's a very tough goal because it means we can't just take passenger cars. We have to do planes and trains and trucks. We can't just do industry, steel and cement. We can't just do agriculture, or heating buildings, or making electricity. We have to do every one of those areas. And today, the cost of the green product to make steel or cement with no emissions is over double the current price. And so the cost to go green is simply unacceptable, even for the rich countries, not to mention middle-income countries like India. And so the path to salvation is huge innovations, including things like clean hydrogen or direct air capture, or, you know, scaling up electric cars and electric trucks to a super high level to take over the way we presently do every one of those activities.
You know, you've taken from my next question, Bill Gates, because apart from striving for clean energy, what are those 3 to 4 innovations that you see, or 3 to 5 areas where you can have maximum innovation for real opportunity? You spoke about electric cars, for example. What are those areas that a country like India in particular you see going forward, where we can actually make a difference and impact on scale again?
Yeah, so it's great that electric cars are starting to catch on. It's still a very small percentage of the market, but as those batteries become cheaper for cars of all sizes, they will become popular, and the government will push them with tax credits and encourage the market to shift. Likewise, for making electricity, the cost of wind and solar has come down. And so India's also installing large amounts of solar. And so those are 2 areas of progress that scaling is very, very hard, even in the next 30 years, to get rid of all the emissions there. The other sectors, though, you know, if I had a magic wand, I'd say we need something to solve the industrial sector. The thing we talk about the most there is this hydrogen, clean hydrogen or green hydrogen, that if it was cheap enough, we would use that instead of hydrocarbons to make things like steel or natural gas. And there's lots of good ideas. Breakthrough Energy, my group, that includes a lot of partners, including Mukesh Ambani is one of the investors and board members in that. We're investing in a lot of companies who have new ideas about doing that cheap hydrogen. And then the big companies are now looking, okay, how far are they going? Should we partner with them and do this with big numbers? So that's at an early stage, but that would be a huge thing. You probably need 10 areas of innovation, and you know, so we have to. That's where the R&D budget is the beginning here, and lots of risk capital. But you know, only 2 or 3 inventions won't solve the entire problem and enable all countries, not just rich countries, all countries to get to zero.
You know, the world releases, and these figures are important at times in a way to tell people about the scale of the problem again. 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases every year. You've been talking about bringing it down to 0. I mean, that sounds something like an environmental equivalent of a moon landing. How do we achieve this sort of paradigm shift, the breakthrough moment? I mean, you're a technology person, and many wonder whether there's a tech break that can actually fix the problem. Is there a technology, in your view, that can fix the problem, given the sheer scale again of it?
Yeah, I can absolutely guarantee without technology breakthroughs, it's just too expensive, and the world will have such a tough time saying, you know, should the rich countries who've done the emissions historically, should they fund all of this? How do we convince everyone where you have to take pain now to get the gain later? And of course, if people say, hey, don't build any new buildings or don't travel, that's unrealistic. Of course, the rich countries could, you know, build smaller houses and travel a bit less. But if you take the world as a whole, where you're just now getting to the levels of basic living size and transport, you know, the idea of reducing the consumption, that's not going to work. That would be, you know, impossible to do and not just in any way. So we're going to build a lot of buildings, but we need to do that in a clean way. We're going to have a lot more cars, but we need to do that in a clean way. So this is the hardest thing humanity's ever done. Harder than a moon landing, which that one actually worked. Here, it's all over the world, and the scale, you know, when you drive around, you'll see cement plants everywhere. Every one of those has to make a change.
So we just heard from Bill Gates, who's really at one end of the climate influence spectrum. Let's now show you a conversation with 3 young climate change activists who are in India fighting to keep the climate clean, fighting a global war, and really lending their enthusiasm and passion to this battle.
We go for holidays to these beautiful places, but the moment one hears the word biodiversity, ecosystem, everyone blanks out. So Disha, let me start with you. Why do ecosystems matter? When we say, don't build this because the bullfrog will die, why should we care?
Okay, sorry, I'm laughing. I find that question quite funny because ecosystem is often seen as a very different part from ourselves, and even the environment is often seen as a separate being. When the truth is, we are dependent on the environment. We are dependent on clean air, clean water, the forests, and the rivers and the ocean. So when you ask me why it's important to protect an ecosystem, you can understand why I find it a little funny, because we are dependent on it, and we are all part of the ecosystem, and often the environmental activism is seen just about the forest, but the truth is environmental activism is about the humans, because we are part of the ecosystem. We aren't separate from it. We are Earth defending itself.
Thank you, Disha. In fact, Christiana Figueres, who was instrumental in bringing 195 countries onto the climate table, said the one thing we have to stop saying is that we're trying to save the planet. We're not trying to save the planet. We're really trying to save ourselves, And Malaika, you're at the heart of communication through your films. You use your camera for advocacy. You've made amazing films on the manta ray and predators, as I said. So how do you use your films and cinema to communicate,
Thank you, Shoma. I think, as storytellers, very often, it's our job to keep the attention on a subject once that moment has passed. And take the pandemic, for example. Right now, everyone's talking about it. It's a really important moment in time as we combat corona. But the reason we're in this situation is because of our extractive relationship with the natural world. And as a filmmaker, I've been, documenting these illegal wildlife markets in Hong Kong and Guangzhou way before the pandemic started. And I think it's important to keep telling these stories of how we can fundamentally reshift and change our relationship with the planet right now. And I think when it comes to wildlife conservation specifically, India has done a phenomenal job. We've managed to protect tigers and elephants and sharks and all kinds of species better than many countries. But we also are in a bit of a pickle right now. And I think it's important for us to see this moment in time as a time when we can actually take a leadership role on the global stage and show that India can actually be an exemplary country with protecting our wildlife and combating climate change.
But Malaika, before I come to you, Gunjan, you are very different in the way you're making wildlife films, You kind of get up close. I described that you're a great adventure sports enthusiast, and you bring some of that adrenaline to the way you're doing films. Typically we think of documentaries with that voiceover, and you see pictures, and you still feel very distant. I was asking you about communicating, that what is the unique sort of quality that you bring to it, and why do you do that?
So I think
Talk about some of your experiences.
Yeah, I think I get a lot of flack for this because sometimes I get unnecessarily close to animals because I obviously am safe and I'm making sure the animal is comfortable. I end up hiking up mountains and diving with sharks and doing all of these sometimes crazy, dangerous things. And often the question is, why do you have to hike up a mountain to tell a story about why that mountain needs to be protected? And that's a good question, honestly. But the reason is because if we tell boring stories about the natural world, we are going to lose people's attention. And as a filmmaker, I'm not just competing with everyone else on National Geographic. I'm competing with everyone else on India Today and people on, NDTV and everyone else out there. And if I want to get someone's attention after a long day at work, I need to make sure that my films are exciting and that a family wants to watch it together. So you come for the adventure, you come for me doing stuff like you can see in the background, but you stay for the conservation message. You stay for the fact that the science is out there. We need to protect our planet, and we probably just have like 10 or 15 or maximum 20 years to do that.
Right. So I'm going to come back to, you've been to all 7 continents, and we'll ask you for some of your experiences. But Gunjan, let me come to you. You've made the Firefox Guardian, which really looked at the red panda and the relationship with the community. So talk to us about that, this interrelatedness, what we were talking about, the interconnectedness. Why should the red panda disappear matter to us? What did you find about that?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Shoma, for that question. And it's interesting that we are talking about red pandas at this stage now, because when I set out to make the film, and I was talking about red pandas to everyone, and I had just read an article in the newspaper which said that they had been downlisted to and uplisted to become endangered. They used to be vulnerable and they were endangered, so I wanted to do something about it. And I was talking to people about red pandas, and to my surprise, or like you can call it my ignorance, one of my friends said that I didn't know pandas came in red. So that's when I realized that how can I expect people to protect a species they don't even know exists? So that's when I started doing more research that how can I tell this story? And that's when I came across the protagonist of my film, Menuka, and she is a simple village girl from a remote corner in Nepal, and she works with Red Panda Network, and I saw a blog article where it was titled Role of Women in Conservation, and she was standing right in the center surrounded by 20 men, and it said, if not me, who will protect red pandas? And I was instantly drawn, and I started then realizing that this is the story I need to tell. It's about the people, it's about the local communities and their role in red panda conservation. And that actually worked. It worked with people if someone is not interested in wildlife, but they were fascinated by her passion towards wildlife. And this is just one example. Like when you're making films, when I was watching films as a teenager, I only saw films about pristine natural worlds. I was seeing films where everything was okay with the polar bears. It was just fuzzy, cute animals. And I had no idea growing up that our natural world was in so much danger. The polar ice caps were melting, and there's so much destruction happening. So that's when I sort of also realized that this is the lens I want to show. I want to show people. Where are the people in these stories? Where are the communities? Where's the problem? And like Malaika said, nobody wants to watch films that just talk about doom and gloom. So I sort of shifted the lens to a story of hope, because there are people working at the grassroots, there are communities who have dedicated their lives to protect a species. So that's how
Malaika, I'm just going to butt in there. Very quickly, why was this community protecting the red panda? Was it just in like the fact that they appreciated it, or was there connectivity? Is it just ethos? What did you find?
I asked them the same question, and they said, if not us, who will? This is our forest. These are our red pandas. Why would we not do this? And to them, it was bizarre that I was asking, why are you saving them? And it just put things into perspective for me that it's a way of life. Conservation is a way of life for them. For us, it's about going to a place, saving a species, like you said. And for them, it's just something they have to do because it's theirs. There's this ownership of land. And that was something really beautiful.
Right. So Disha, let me come to you. You know, we've been reeling out these statistics, but the fact is that our habitats are disappearing, you know, and there's a lot of stress on that. So one, you've been very, very active in this zone. You also are looking at government and policy and, you know, why things are eroding the way they are. So talk to me a little bit about which are the habitats in India that are under stress, why does it matter, and what is the government doing wrong in its policies?
Thank you for that, Shoma. Because you started with habitat, let me come with one statement that people often make is that our forest cover is increasing. But if you look closely at the data, you will see that it's the open forest cover that's increasing. And open forest cover, if you look at the definition of it, it's so vague and sometimes it's defined as just 30, 40 trees in like a park. So you can go down to a park, find trees that are just, sticking or growing next to each other, and that would be considered a forest. And because of the vagueness of the definition, you can just say your forest cover is increasing, but this is the case for a lot of our environmental norms because they're so vague, they're so ill-defined. The data can be manipulated, and this was the case with the recent Forest Conservation Act that they're amending. What they actually brought it quite recently. It was on October 2nd, if I'm not wrong. And it was only published digitally, firstly, and it was only published in English. And the whole country doesn't speak English, and the whole country isn't online. So firstly, it's inaccessible, and the second issue, there are several issues with it, but the second one is the fact that they've diluted some of the norms in the Forest Amendment Act, Forest Conservation Act, my bad. The first is a lot of projects don't need the approvals that they would require before. The railways and the highways, the ministry won't need forest approvals, and if the land near borders is considered important or strategic, they won't need permissions anymore, and land that's been forested after 1996 won't be protected, and a customary afforestation won't be protected once again. So all of this really dilutes how we look at habitat and how environment is seen. And this isn't just the case today. We've been doing this with the EIA, which is the Environmental Impact Assessment, last year. So we've been diluting a lot of norms when it comes to environmental policy.
You know, the last several months have brought out very starkly why climate change is one of the greatest threats mankind faces at this moment. Floods, wildfires, extreme cold and heat waves are on the rise globally. World leaders are meeting in Glasgow for the COP26 summit with the aim of reaching an agreement to curb carbon emissions fast enough to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. My colleague Nabila Jamal decodes what to expect from this big climate summit.
Flash floods in Germany, tropical cyclones, forest fires in Western Australia and California, heat waves in North America, and a lot more closer to us. The intense rainfall and landslides in India, images that would scare us all, and it should. Because what we witnessed in 2021 has been a manifold rise in adverse climate change events. So what has really triggered this climate change, and what do we need to do to prevent more of this? Enter the United Nations Climate Change Committee, or what it's famously called COP. The 26th edition this year holds massive significance, with global leaders set to make significant legislative changes that could usher a new era in climate reforms. So what exactly is COP? The Conference of the Parties, COP as it's called, is the supreme decision-making body of the United Nations framework for Convention on Climate Change. It is made of 196 member nations and came into force in 1994. They've met every once a year since then. This year, Glasgow will play host to this crucial meet from October 31st all the way to November 12th. Now, you must be wondering here, who are the stakeholders? Well, global leaders, negotiators, researchers, and policymakers from more than 190 countries are set to come under one roof to tackle the challenge of climate change. The 4-point agenda ahead of COP26 will be: number 1, securing global net zero by mid-century and keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. Number 2, adapting to protect communities and natural habitats. Number 3, mobilizing finance of at least $100 billion in climate finance every year. And number 4, working together as a cohesive unit to avert climate crisis in the future. Now, you must be wondering if this committee's assessment has paid dividends in the past. Well, it has. One of the major achievements of COP came in 1997 with the establishment of Kyoto Protocol, an international treaty aimed at reducing emissions of greenhouse gases in industrialized countries. In 2009, at the Copenhagen summit, the aim of restricting global warming below 2 degrees Celsius was ratified. In 2015, following 20 years of negotiations, the Paris Agreement unanimously adopted to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, above the pre-industrial period levels, and continue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And now, in 2021, another event that could possibly be the game changer here. US President Joe Biden will be present at that summit. This year, Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. Remember, the United States broke away from the committee in 2019, a decision of predecessor Donald Trump, which drew massive criticism. Other global leaders in attendance would be Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, French President Emmanuel Macron, Canadian President Justin Trudeau, South Korean President Moon Jae-in, EU Representatives President Ursula von der Leyen, to name a few here. India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi is all set to attend the 26th conference of the parties in Glasgow. The move is crucial as Prime Minister Modi will outline the country's vision for tackling the looming threat of climate change at that summit. Two big names who will not be in attendance here is China's Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. All eyes now will be on Glasgow, a landmark meet which could possibly find a roadmap to counter unprecedented events that we witnessed in 2021.